Okay, and here we go, up the hill. The bakkie segment is by far the largest within the local automotive sphere, and with an ever-increasing number of Chinese brands joining the fray, we've seen the introduction of more bakkies. Now, GWM got in on the action many years ago with the P series, and now it's entered the luxury double cab segment with the P500, seen here next to me in 2.4 litre diesel, guys. But to see if the P500 has what it takes, we need to compare it against one of the best bakkies in the segment. We just so happen to have our long-term Ford Ranger Tremor here to see what it's got. Styling is an incredibly important part of any lifestyle double cab bakkie's appeal. Now, before you get into it in the comment section, I know that this car doesn't really compete with that car. I understand that. We just so happen to have a long-term Tremor, and I think it's a good thing to compare the P500 with. There is no getting away from the fact that both cars are very Americanized in terms of the styling packages that they offer. If we look at this P500, I see a lot of Ram in its styling. This large chrome up front here, the massive P series badge. There's even roof rails and a spoiler at the back. It looks very Americanized, but with the road bias tires, it doesn't really look off-road ready. It's very much a lifestyle bakkie. In contrast, the Tremor looks like it can take on pretty much any off-road trail that you throw at it, with the chunky all-terrain tires, this Conqueror grey paint, and indeed the Bilstein suspension that underpins the car. Everything about the Tremor screams off-road trail versus the P500 which looks slightly more lifestyle oriented. I suppose it all depends on what you prefer. Let us know in the comments section which one you'd take home. An often overlooked aspect in bakkie reviews is, well, the bucks themselves, the loading bays in the bakkies. And both of these cars have got fairly innovative solutions to, well, loading bay solutions. So let's have a look at the P500. If you tap this little button on the inside of the badge here, will open a split folding tailgate here, which is super handy. And as my colleague Reno noted on his recent trip in this car, you can reach into the back of the bakkie much easier with this split folding tailgate open. You can also use this step to hop inside. There's also a window at the rear there, which is super practical. But if we close it and you hold this button, you then get a traditional load bed. Incredibly practical and a really good solution. But the Ranger's got a few party tricks too. This easy lift tailgate, super light, very easy to lower, and I can lift this up with a single finger. There's also a ruler on the inside here for tradesmen to be able to measure things. And if you're short like me, this little step on either side of the car here makes it super easy to stand up and get into the rear of the bakkie. Now, both are super practical, but if I had to hand the prize for this round to one bakkie, it would be the P500 because of that split folding tailgate. I think it's a bit of a game changer. What do you guys think? Let us know in the comment section. Looking at rear occupant space, it's decent here in the Tremor, but there's not really many creature comforts for rear occupants. You do get rear ventilation and a 12-volt socket, but there's not much else. You can flip this down to reveal a little drinks holder. It's leather covered seats, and it's reasonably comfortable. They're at a decent angle, but there's not too many luxuries in the rear of a Ranger. Things I do like about this Tremor, that door handle, they integrated into the handles here, and once you've used that type of door handle, well, other door handles simply won't suffice. The Tremor also gets this rubberized flooring here, which the brand claims you can hose down. So if you get the floor of a Tremor super dirty like we are today doing some off-roading, well, you can just hose it off, which I think is super practical. Let's head into the GWM to see what that's got to offer.
Rear occupant space in the P500 is slightly better than in the Ranger. It's also a little bit more luxurious in here. The seats are a bit more comfortable, and well, the little cup holders from the Ranger are thoroughly beaten by this fancy setup that we've got in the P500. There's also a 12-volt socket, just like the Ranger, but you also get 2 USB charging points for rear occupants, and you can open that rear window that we mentioned earlier. There's also the ability to adjust the front driver's or passenger seat, so you can give yourself a bit more legroom. So it's definitely a bit more luxurious in the back of the P500.
Hopped into the Ranger. I've spent the better part of a month with this Tremor now. Covered about 1,300 kilometers at an average of 10.8 liters per 100 kilometers, and Ford claim a figure in the sevens, which is just not possible, I don't think, in a car like this, especially with the Bilstein suspension, which has raised the car up. It's got 262 millimeters of ground clearance. It's got amazing departure, approach, and breakover angles. 800 millimeters of wading depth. All of these figures are going to come into effect when we take them on the off-road course a bit later, but those tires, the added ride height, they don't really help the car in terms of its on-road fuel consumption. Now, refinement and comfort is what the Ranger really does exceptionally well. This latest generation Ranger really doesn't feel like a bakkie most of the time. That bakkie bounce, as I call it, which you'll see is quite prominent in the P500, really isn't here in this car. Now, bakkie bounce emanates from leaf springs at the rear, which are unladen. As soon as you add a load to most bakkies, the Hilux used to be a big culprit of this. It used to bounce and fidget quite a bit on the road, and then you place a load on the back, put a couple of motocross bikes in the back, and all of a sudden its ride quality is great. The P500, I think, is very much the same story. A little bit fidgety of a ride, but will get better as you go. Whereas the Ranger, this thing rides pretty well regardless of the terrain. And if you're hearing a bit of a rattle here, you'll have to excuse it. We had to put a lot of the gear in this car and divide it amongst this and the P series. Problem with having bakkies is you don't really have a boot, so you have to put everything in the back seat. So we've shoved everything into the cars so that they don't get wet out here at MX Legends. So really the impressive thing for me is the usability of this Ranger. Daily driving comfort, it really feels like an SUV most of the time, and a lot of that stems from the drivetrain and suspension. The drivetrain in this particular car is a 2-liter bi-turbo diesel sequential turbocharger, so that eliminates quite a lot of perceived turbo lag from the diesel engine. 154 kilowatts and 500 newton meters of torque. It's paired to a 10-speed automatic gearbox, sends power to the rear wheels most of the time, but you can obviously select 4 high, and it's obviously got 4 low, and you've got 4 auto, which is an auto terrain response system, and you can flick between various driving modes, and you can go between normal and eco, and you can go into off-road settings and things of that nature, just like you get in many modern cars. But for me, it's the versatility of the entire Ranger lineup. It reminds me very much of the Porsche 911 in terms of the bakkie wheel, because there is really a Ranger that can accommodate all needs and tastes. This Tremor might not be everyone's cup of tea, but for me at least, this gives some proper off-road credentials to the Ranger lineup. I'm not trying to suggest that this is the be-all and end-all of off-road bakkies, but it's pretty darn impressive, which you'll see on the off-road trail later. But it's really the combination of this on-road smooth ride quality and just open road ease with which this car covers mileage, combined with its ability to head off of the beaten path, that makes it such a good lifestyle bakkie. And if you go for the more road biased Rangers with in terms of XLT, with the more road biased tires, you'll get an even more refined setup. You'll compromise a little bit on your off-road credentials, but that's honestly a sacrifice worth making. And then if you want to go in the middle ground, you can go for a Wild Track or a Wild Track X, which are a little bit cheaper than this Tremor, but obviously don't have the rubberized flooring, the suspension upgrades. This car's also got a feature called Trail Assist. It's basically like off-road cruise control in many ways. It really helps in off-road situations. We'll give that a go just now, but I've just been so impressed with the Ranger on-road. This powertrain has got very little perceived lag considering what it is. The gearbox is so much improved from the previous gen Ranger, where this 10-speed just felt like it didn't know what gear it wanted to be in. It was up and down and up and down. This car feels a lot more solid in terms of its calibration. It feels a bit punchier, and 154 kilowatts and 500 newton meters may sound like a decent amount of power. But you have to remember, this car is nearly 2.4 tons as tested here. The P500 is 2,550 kilograms. The Ranger's around 2,390-ish kilograms as tested. So there's a bit of a difference there, but there's also a power and torque difference. That P series is around 135 kilowatts and 480 newton meters, so it sacrifices quite a bit of power. It's got 400 cc's more displacement, but it's got one turbocharger versus the two turbochargers in the Ranger, and I honestly think this is a great bakkie drivetrain. It's just not the most efficient Ranger that I've driven. But let's head into the P500 and see what that's like to drive in this rather inclement weather. So I've just hopped into the P500. Now, the model we have on test is the 2.4 litre turbo diesel variant, which is the one that I've been the most keen to drive. You see, there's a powerful hybrid version of that bakkie, but for me, a hybrid turbo petrol bakkie doesn't really make nearly as much sense as a more simplified 2.4, 2 litre, whatever the displacement is, standard diesel bakkie with an automatic gearbox. This is a 2.4 litre turbo diesel, 135 kilowatts, 480 newton meters. It's got a 9-speed automatic gearbox. Paired to it, can send the power to the rear or all four wheels. There's a 4-low function. There's both front and rear locking differentials, and we'll test out its off-road capability a little bit later. Initial impressions, well, the ride, refinement, and general drivetrain are not on the same level as the Ranger. This ride quality is a lot more harsh. There is that perceived bakkie bounce I alluded to earlier. When there's no load at the rear, things get quite a bit bumpier inside, and that's just a characteristic of many bakkies, but the Ranger seems to do without that quite easily. It's honestly a really well sorted bakkie, that Ranger. It's not to say that this is bad, it's just the Ranger is better. And when it comes to the drivetrain refinement, well, the Ranger's better there too. This has got a little bit of perceived lag because it is a single turbo setup. The engine is just not as refined. The gearbox is not as refined either. You're a lot more aware of the prevailing road conditions underneath you in this car, and you're also a lot more aware of the diesel engine. It's a little bit more clattery and loud, and the gearbox is not as smooth. You can hear and feel the gearbox doing its thing as you come to a stop, which again wouldn't really be a problem if I hadn't just hopped out of the Ranger. These are just things that you notice, and it seems like a bit of a mismatch, because you'd think the slightly gruffer powertrain would suit the more off-road ready Ranger, and that powertrain would suit this P500, because this is, for all intents and purposes, a luxury bakkie. There's no getting around it. Now, there are luxurious variants of the Ranger which would be a better comparison for this car, but we just so happen to have the Ranger as our long-term vehicle, so I decided to film them both back to back. It's not a traditional comparison in that regard. You can't really choose one over the other because they are very different products. It's just very interesting to see what GWM have brought to the market here, because the P series, when that came out, that impressed me. It set a new benchmark in many ways for affordable bakkies at that point, and I think a lot of brands sat up and took notice. But to do a premium bakkie is a lot more difficult, and you can see that the brand has done a lot of homework and they've done a great job with the P500, but that final polish, that final execution to make it a truly premium product is just not quite there yet. The ride quality could use a little bit of a polish, and this diesel engine could do with some refinements. It just doesn't feel as refined as the Ranger overall, and that Ranger's riding on all terrains. This car is on road tires, and somehow the Ranger managed to feel more quiet, comfortable, and refined than this car. It is a tough act to be bigger and more imposing than that Ranger, and the P500 is one of the few bakkies on the market that is slightly bigger than the Ranger. It's longer, has a longer wheelbase. It's not quite as wide, but it's also in standard guise a little bit taller than your average Garden Variety Ranger, not the Tremor, which is obviously lifted up. So this is a big bakkie, and it feels substantial out on the road. And as I mentioned earlier, had I not just hopped out of the Ranger, I would be massively impressed with what this thing has to offer. It feels pretty quiet, pretty refined. Diesel engine, once it's up and going, is reasonably good. Fuel consumption, this is a bit better than the Tremor. It's hovering at around 10.3, 10.4 liters per 100 kilometers, but it's not too different from the Tremor, which is sitting at roughly 10.8 liters per 100 kilometers at the time of recording. But to be honest, that comes down to those all-terrain tires and the slightly higher ride on that Ranger. I do think these two engines are very similar, the bi-turbo from the Ford and the 2.4 diesel from GWM. I think they are very similar in terms of the fuel consumption that you'll get out on the real road, if you compare apples with apples. I think what we need to do though with these cars is let's check out how they perform off-road. Now bear in mind, this car does have all the off-road goodies, various driving modes and low range locking diffs and things of that nature, but it does have a brand called Gitti of tires on, and they are road biased tires, and this is not a traditional off-road bakkie. This is a lifestyle bakkie that can do the odd off-road excursion. If you want a proper off-road bakkie, you should go for the likes of the Tremor, and that's why we're going to take them off-road and compare the two. I just want to see how close the P500 gets to the Tremor in terms of its off-road ability. So let's head off and check that out. Let's also have a look at these two cars from just an interior and features perspective. Alrighty, here we are at a relatively disused off-road course in January of 2025 in the GWM P500. I say the date because nobody has been around for a month or so to cut the grass or do anything at the facility. They did ask us to apologize on their behalf, and obviously nobody has used this trail, so we're the first ones going over this one this year, and I'm doing it in this P500. It's a very steep obstacle. A car like this, I would imagine, for its target audience, is not going to be doing bundu bashing in an ultra luxurious double cab bakkie, but let's see if it'll be able to do it. We're in 4 low, we've got front and rear diff lock engaged, and we're about to climb quite a steep slope. This car does have road tires on it, and we're about to go through some pretty deep water. Okay, and here we go up the hill. Yeah, it does this quite easily. Okay, whoa. Okay, we've crested. Ground clearance is good. We didn't touch coming over that obstacle, which is impressive. There's a nice off-road monitor here showing me what's going on around me with a little animated version of my car, which is cool. Yeah, no, that did it quite easily. I honestly think that's about as difficult an obstacle as you would do. I tried to go the other way up the obstacle earlier, and this car was not having it. It's a bit unfair to take the car up the wrong side of the obstacle. But, I mean, honestly, that is a super muddy climb we just did there. Does perfectly well. No complaints there. Let's head through some water here. Wading. Oh, that's good. I'm impressed. Let's try the Tremor. Righty, here we are in the Ford Ranger Tremor. Let's see how this does the same obstacle. I'm going to pop it into 4 low. Click onto my... Okay. We're good. Cool. Let's do the same obstacle in the Ranger. This is honestly a bit of a joke for this car. It does it so easily, it's ridiculous. Oh man. It's exactly what I expected though. This just feels a lot more at home in this environment. It comes down to the tires, the suspension's better, the approach, breakover and departure angles are better, ground clearance is better, more the same weighting depth, 800 millimeters, but just, yeah, a much more accomplished off-road vehicle as we may have expected. I'm just shocked at how quiet everything was. In the GWM, I was hearing clicks and beeps and all kinds of sounds while trying to activate everything and going over the obstacles. And this car didn't hear a thing. I didn't even feel any wheel spin going over that obstacle. It's absolutely crazy. Heading inside, we've decided to hop into the Ranger first. And can I first of all apologize for how dirty it is in here. It is absolutely pouring with rain outside. We've been in the mud. We've been doing some off-roading with these things. But it's highlighted a few benefits of this Tremor's interior, such as the ability to wash it out. The carpeting on the inside of that P500 is a nightmare at the moment. I don't even know how we're going to clean that, but that's a problem for another day. When we look at functionality and what the interior is like, obviously being a Tremor and an off-road model, there is a lot more utilitarian nature to this entire interior. Materials and quality is reasonably good. There's a lot of hard plastics in here. It's to be expected with a bakkie. As you'll see in that P500, that's got quite a few soft touch surfaces, but a lot of this is quite hard wearing and it looks like it will stand the test of time pretty well. Infotainment system is this large slab style system, works very nicely. You still got physical buttons to control the climate control. I've gotten used to this panel and effectively started treating the screen as being sort of 2/3 the size that it really is, because you actually get a usable screen that is sort of that big, and the rest is all climate control and you can adjust it over here. Have a physical gear lever, which when we were doing off-roading now, I found a lot more simple to use than in the P series, which has got that sort of different, it almost looks like a rotating arm of a gear lever. It's a bit strange. 2 cup holders, an area for a smartphone, wireless smartphone charger, and then you can adjust your driving settings from here, and it's very simple, very easy to do. Nothing about the car is complicated. You get a digitized instrument cluster, a multi-function steering wheel, and the only bits of gloss black plastic that I foresee not aging too well are around the vents here and on the steering wheel. The rest of the interior seems to be quite hardy. And in terms of features, again, not really fair to compare the two cars. The P500 has a large number of features in the car, but it is a luxury double cab. This does lean towards luxury somewhat, but it is more of an off-road only model with the upgraded suspension and the all-terrain tires. But overall, this is a fantastic place to spend time. I have no complaints. I don't really need any more luxury in my double cab than this car provides at the moment. So let's hop into the P500 and see what that interior is like. I think it's quite luxurious. Here we are inside the P500, and again, my apologies for how dirty it is in here. We've been in and out of these cars. It's pouring with rain outside, so this car looks decidedly filthy inside at the moment. But aside from the state of the interior, the general finish, fit and build quality in here is impressive. I do have a few gripes, whereas everything in that Ranger is a sort of darker color that wears quite well. The beige headliner in this car is not looking great. It's got around 15,000 Ks on this press unit, and there's grubby handprints everywhere. Being a bakkie, it's going to be used for a few more utilitarian things, and this beige headliner I don't think was a good move. But in decidedly un-bakkie-like fashion, in addition to a rear spoiler, which I found a bit weird, there's no sports bar at the back, but there is a spoiler at the back, which is strange, but I suppose it's quite a unique product. This has also got a panoramic sunroof, which is something you don't see too often in double cab bakkies. And really, when you sit inside here, this is much more like a luxury SUV than a bakkie. The screen in the center here is quite frankly massive. Functionality is pretty good too, and if you'll see on the CarPlay system, it's got the name that this car is called in Chinese markets, and I don't know if I should repeat it on camera. It's also a digitized instrument cluster here. You can control the climate control very much like the Ranger with a selection of buttons over here. There is a distinct brand identity when you're inside the car. These logos here let you know that you're driving a P500, which I think is important. There's buttons to control the multiple features in this car. Now, we've got a variety of buttons on the steering wheel. We've got a variety of buttons over here. The first few buttons control the ventilation and heating for the seats. Behind that, you can adjust things like the start-stop system, the camera system, which is really good. It gives you a little CGI rendered version of your car with cameras all around, giving you a 360-degree view of your car. It helps when you're going off-road and when you're parking. It's really good. Then you can adjust your off-road settings, so you can go into driving mode, and that ranges from road settings, sport, normal, eco, and then you can go into 4 high, and then you can also, if you place the car in neutral, put the car in 4 low, and you can activate the front and rear differential locks. There's also 2 handy storage areas. This is quite a large one here. We've got a couple of bottles of water in here, and this does slide back and forth to reveal 2 more cup holders over here. This center console here has got a wireless smartphone charger, and this slides back and forward. Generally speaking, there is a lot more features in this car than there is in that Ranger, but as I mentioned earlier, they're not really in the same ballpark, these 2 cars. So I would say if you're after a luxury product, this is really fantastic value at this point. 890,000 Rand, comprehensive service plan and warranty, which will pop up on the screen now. Better than the offering from Ford. The Ford is also a little bit more expensive, unfortunately, but it is a different product. It's aimed at the hardcore off-road enthusiast. This is more the lifestyle buyer who's looking for something that can occasionally go off-road, maybe go to the mountain bike park and go on family holidays. And I suppose that's gonna do it for this video. There isn't really a winner here because it isn't a traditional comparison. If you're looking for something that is off-road ready, that Ranger Tremor is fantastic. And if you're looking for something that's a little bit more luxurious, well, you know, unfortunately for the P500, there's also a variety of Rangers that you can choose from that do very similar things to this car, albeit at a slightly higher price. If I had to choose between the 2 cars so that I don't seem like I'm not taking a position, I just feel like that Ranger is better to drive on the road. It's got a better powertrain, better suspension setup, and I enjoy driving that car more. It's also far more adept off-road than this car. Don't get me wrong, P500 is an amazing first attempt and first entry into the market by GWM for its own luxury double cab bakkie, but the Ranger is the segment leader for a reason. So if I had to choose between the 2, even though these 2 don't really compete with each other, I would definitely opt for the Ranger. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the AutoTrader YouTube channel. It really helps us out. If you've enjoyed this content, hit the like button, leave us a comment below, let us know what you think of these 2 bakkies. What do you think of the P series, or the P500 rather? Do you think that it stands a chance within the local market? Would you consider buying one? Let us know what you'd like us to test next. Thank you guys for watching. Cheers.